prepare our students for content. But we realize that the conversation around social and emotional needs is just as large as our preparation for assessments every day. Our students have a wide range of needs, and they come to school and they're looking, if they're not receiving love at home, they're looking for love as soon as they get to our schools. So shoes that fit could be, from a health standpoint, how do we balance what students aren't receiving, and we have a great program there also. But social and emotionally, do we have strong relationships? Because that may be something missing that a student doesn't get at home. So the idea of shoes that fit. And we're having a challenging conversation. We know that it comes with a number of different biases sometimes, but we're prepared for it.
So if we're looking at shoes that fit, and a lot of people would then say, but if you do equity, you're only talking about the poor kids, Dr. Spence. You're only talking about the kids of color or kids who may come from a different country. What about the high achievers? What happens to them? You forget about them.
Right. Well, I think it's a great question. And actually, it's very interesting. So we're hosting a regional conference. It's called the Conference on Excellence Through Equity. And it's really based on some work that we've done previously with a leader in this conversation nationally, Dr. Pedro Noguera. And the premise of and even in the title, Excellence Through Equity, is that it's about you can't be an excellent school division unless you're reaching every child. And so the message has to be clear that it is about a fit for every child. So it's about lifting all boats on the tide, right? And making sure that the work that we do supports our struggling learners as well as our highest achieving learners, and that we're finding the right fit for them in our school system and providing learning experiences that really not just meet their needs, but that meet our expectations.
So part of this, at least from the reading that I've been doing, has to do with determining success. And who determines what success means per student, number one. And then secondly, if there are biases there against certain students, then how do you start to make that change? Because you're talking about a mindset change in terms of education. I'll let both of you answer that, and I'll start with you, Aaron.
Sure. Well, so success is defined for us in a number of ways. I mean, obviously there's the accountability measurement of success, which is are your students capable of passing standardized tests, which are sort of writ large to capture community expectations for kind of minimum competencies in the curriculum, right? And that's important. I mean, I think that there is a value in that. And then success on other measures of testing, things like the SATs and the PSATs, and then you look at things like advanced placement classes and entrance in those, and then success on those tests, and you look at graduation rate. So does the child graduate from school? So, I mean, there are some very key measures of success that are very important to us. But increasingly, we're also having, and it's one of our key strategic goals, a conversation around personalized learning and really having the students take ownership of what do they see as success in the learning experience, right? So not, I mean, in addition to what we've said is important, so not in lieu of. So we don't want them to say, well, graduation isn't really a thing for me. That's not going to be a negotiable. There are things that aren't negotiable, but there are things that a child might say, I am just intensely passionate about the arts, and I really want to figure out a way to connect my learning to the arts and to everything that I do in my study of the arts. And so we want to help them design a pathway that will allow them to pursue their passion. We might have another child that says, I am just absolutely passionate about the environment. And we want to help them find a pathway through school that allows them to learn more about sustainable practices and do some of that work in the field with some of our partners, and then, come out on the other side of that ready to go to work. Working with Lynn Haven River now as an example, or go to school and get an environmental science degree with some solid background behind them in that arena. And that could give you, dozens of examples of that. But we would define that as success too, then, that you've been able to pursue your passion through school, and we've given you the right pathways and the right experiences to achieve that.
Let me play devil's advocate for a minute with you, Rashard. And
Sure.
And the question is, and I take this back to particularly people of my age, never mind how old that is, and older, who, when they were coming through high school, it was the old guidance counselor conversation that was always held, that where certain students were told, you're going to college and you're going to be successful in college, and other students were told, you're going to a trade or you're going in the military, don't even think about college, because even if that student wanted to do that. So in this new scenario, in this new way of thinking about helping all of our children be successful, how do we change those attitudes?
Well, if those attitudes, still exist, we'd like to think that, they're not as, aggressive as they may have been in the past. We believe that options and multiple pathways for our students represent this buffet of success. Dr. Spence mentioned personalized learning, but also personalized learning and sustainable relationships. Mm-hmm. If we create significant relationships, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what you look like, regardless of your challenges the night before, then we believe that Virginia Beach City Public Schools can provide equitable options for success, a lattice for success for our students. And the military, college prep track, and whether you decide to go to the community college, we consider those examples of success because it links to your readiness and who you are as a young person. And that eliminates some of those, those examples of implicit bias maybe around which neighborhood or where you fit on that map. And Dr. Spence mentioned our map. So
if I'm a teacher, I'm going, oh, Lord, here they got some more stuff for me to do.
Well, no, the good news is that this really plays well into what we're already doing.
Okay.
Right? And so, because what we're trying to do is really take the work we're already doing and coordinate it into some specific pathways for young people, And so you're exactly right. In the past, it's been sort of this tracking. So you're going to go in this direction, you're going to go in this direction. And my thought process is we ought to be able to, when a child graduates from our schools, ought to have choice. They shouldn't have put in a position. And a great example of that is we have a wonderful technical education center. And I was over there one day and I was visiting, and there was a young man, and he's a junior in high school, and he was studying small engine repair. And we have a great partnership with a number of local companies, and he would be hired to come right out of school and work on small engines. Mm-hmm. But as I was talking to him, he said, it's kind of interesting, though. I've been starting to think maybe I want to go to college. And he felt as if he wasn't on that path. And my perspective would be he ought to have all of those opportunities. And our idea,
but aren't even the diplomas at this point kind of forcing that path, if you will? Because aren't there certain diplomas that you get based on what courses you take, based on how you navigate through the school system?
There are basically two diplomas. There's an advanced diploma and a standard diploma. And then there are different seals you can get. So you can get a career in technical education completer seal. And so there are some things that may lead you in those directions. And what we're trying to be very clear with in our career planning with students is when you get to the end, we want you to be able to turn left and get an associate's degree and go into work. We want you to go straight ahead with a career certification before you leave us and go to work, or we want you to turn right and go to college. And we want you to have any of those options in front of you. And the key to this is that that's for every child. Yeah. Because I think what's happened in the past, and I think the data points to this, is that there have been some barriers to certain students accessing rigorous coursework that prepares them for college. Mm-hmm. And part of our work in equity is to understand why those barriers have existed and to break those barriers down.
I tell you, I had an experience. I was a judge for the Virginian Pilot Scholarship program, and I've done it for several years. And the disparity in the students who make it to the level where we get to evaluate their work is just incredibly noticeable. And you can just pinpoint from where the school divisions that they come from, where they live and so forth. And a lot of students that come from lower socioeconomic areas, predominantly black schools, et cetera, if they make that list, there still is such a disparity between the SAT scores, the amount of volunteer work that they've had, to be able to do afterwards. I mean, there's so many different factors in there that just where you can just see it. It's just so clear. And trying to overcome that's a big, big hurdle.
Well, I'll give you an example. So, yeah, it's absolutely a big hurdle. I'll give you an example just related to our own data. Mm-hmm. There's a test. It's the PSAT. It's the preliminary SAT test, and it's used to measure academic and career readiness. And it also suggests that some students may have AP potential, so potential for advanced placement coursework, which is the most rigorous coursework that we can offer, right? Mm-hmm. And we looked at that data here this past year, and that data suggested that out of the entire city of Virginia Beach, students who took that test, so the ninth grade class and 10th grade class that took that test, less than 200 African American males had potential to participate in an AP course. Well, that just can't stand. So that means that there's work to do before they get to that test.
Mm-hmm.
That there are things that we're not doing to adequately
But
prepare
did they
them
even
for that
take the
rigor.
test also? I mean, because that's another part of it.
Well, that particular test we have all of our students take.
I see. Okay, because I was going to say sometimes parents and guardians are unaware of opportunities and so forth, and so those students also miss out, from that perspective. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about excellence through equity and how we can make sure that all students receive the education that they need in order to be successful in life. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Mark joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Look, I just have two quick questions. Most school systems here locally in Hampton Roads, they have a secondary teacher in the kindergarten classroom. Norfolk is one that does not. How critical do you think it is not to have two adults in the classroom at the kindergarten age? And then my second question is, given the state's mandate 600 students to one counselor, giving the family breakdown, it's my opinion that a lot of the children come to school every day really weighted down with some issues that they shouldn't have to be dealing with. What can you do to compensate for that 1 to 600 ratio so that these children can have outlet to really voice and get maybe some attention to some of their concerns that they have going on domestically?
Okay, thank you, Mark, for the call. We'll let our panel answer that. Rashard, you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you. Hello, Mark. So speaking first to the idea, you mentioned the language secondary teacher in a classroom. We do, on an elementary level, provide assistance in the classroom, in our lower grade classrooms, just depending upon the enrollment and the population there in the classroom. But the other piece you mentioned also around, how do we, with a ratio of 1 to 600, meet the needs of our students? That's a challenge. That's a challenge, and that's a challenge that we acknowledge. For maybe 15 to 20 years, we've been a part of the standards movement, and the focus has been, testing and assessment. We realize that. How do we get back to one-on-one conversations between the school counselor and the student so we can link more to some of those social and emotional needs? We're compensating the best that we can, particularly with our positive behavior and intervention and supports program that we have. Also making sure.
What does that mean?
Well, PBIS, that's the acronym for that, is a focus on including students in the decision-making process around discipline and or decisions. It's also incentive-laden, so we can ensure that our students are being a part of that process and they have some goals to look forward to. But Mark, back to your question, that secondary piece is important for our early grades, making sure that there's someone to supplement the teacher. And also, our counselors need to be able to be counselors, and that's something that we're working on.
Well, and just to be clear, our counselors aren't the only people who help us address these issues. So we do have an incredible staff of psychologists. We have an incredible staff of school social workers. School has changed quite a bit. And the expectations for what schools do for our communities has changed quite a bit. So we don't just teach anymore, right? So we are a social services organization. We work with healthcare. In fact, we're one of the largest healthcare providers, really, if you think about it, in the city.
I am glad to hear you say that, though, Dr. Spence, because there are a lot of educators that I've heard say, our job is to teach. It's not to take care of their social needs or their health needs and all the other things that make you a whole person. So
well, I think we broadly as educators, not me personally, but I think broadly as educators wish maybe we didn't have to do these things, but recognize the invaluable role that schools play in our communities. And so we are there. We're not only kind of the nurturers and caregivers during the day, but we certainly are there to do healthcare and social services and provide wraparound services to our children to make sure that they're successful. And that's all part of providing students what they need to be successful and that's making sure every child's successful, which gets back to that conversation.
Making sure the shoes fit. Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're talking about excellence through equity, a new approach to ensuring that all students are college, career, and or military ready upon graduation. My guests are Dr. Aaron Spence, Superintendent of Virginia Beach City Public Schools, and Mr. Rashard J. Wright, Virginia Beach City Public Schools Chief Schools Officer. My husband is an education consultant, and we were talking about this last evening. And he said, what about the parental component? Where do parents play in this whole idea of equity and in helping the students?
Well, to be clear, the research is absolutely clear on this, right? So parents are a key partner, the key partner in the success of their child. And that's sort of intuitive. But we also understand that's also a challenge, particularly when we're talking about students who struggle, because very often those are students who are coming from single-parent households. Those are students who are coming from families whose parents hold 3 and 4 jobs, or whose parents are in prison, or whose parents are deployed. I mean, so and not to sort of insert stereotypes, but that's just the reality of a lot of our students who struggle. And so we make every effort to engage our parents, and we need to continue to get better at making efforts to engage our parents. But the cautionary note that I would add to that conversation is, if we allow it can become an excuse for not educating the child. So we could say, well, I can't do anything with that child. He doesn't, his mom won't even come in and talk to me. We can't allow that to be our excuse. So we have to acknowledge, well, we're going to continue to try to engage that parent, but in the absence of that, we're going to make sure we do what we have to do to make the shoe fit.
So what, in this conference that you guys are putting on, and I understand that there are several school divisions from our area that are participating, what are you trying to accomplish at the conference?
On July 26th at Kellam High School, we have well over 8 school divisions that will be participating and partnering with us for this Excellence Through Equity conference. The first goal, Barbara, is to define what is excellent. What is excellence through equity? What does that look like in our school divisions? Keeping in mind that will vary.
I was going to say it's going to look different depending on the school division. Isn't it
will look different based on the strategic framework approach per division, and also have we unpacked discipline data? Are we having conversations around cultural awareness? The second goal of the conference is to look at a framework, the framework that's highlighted in the text by way of Pedro Negrero and Alan Blankstein, to look at successful principles and or strategies that have worked nationally and based on their studies. And then thirdly, how do we use each other as a network and a resource bank as we move forward? Again, considering where we are and our approach is to continue to tackle equity and ensure that our students are being successful. So those are the 3 goals.
I hope most of our audience knows this, but in case people don't, we are owned by the 19 school divisions within Eastern Virginia. WHRO is owned by them. And I know that on the superintendent and upper management level, there's a lot of crosstalk and cooperation and so forth. Does that happen also in the classroom level in terms of your teachers and guidance counselors and those who interact with day-to-day with students in terms of looking at best practices from each other and trying to figure out what's the best thing to do?
I think to a small degree with some of the state organizations that happens, but I think day-to-day it does not. And I think one of the goals of this conference would be to be able to bring together some of the different leaders within school divisions to begin having that crosstalk about, okay, what are you doing that's working? How can we steal that from you? And then vice versa. Here's an idea based on what you just said that we're trying that we think might be helpful for you.
Absolutely. Just so people know, the participating school divisions, I assume this is from your PowerPoint. So it's Virginia Beach City Public Schools, Chesapeake, Williamsburg, James City County, Newport News, Poquoson, Norfolk, Suffolk, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth, and Caroline County Public Schools will be participating in this conference. Now, this is for educators. This is not for the general public. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's actually overfilled at this stage.
It's already overfilled. That's great. That is great. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call. What questions do you have about equity and excellence, and what do you expect from our public school systems? A caller called and unfortunately we lost him, but they wanted to know, oh gosh, my computer Just went there. It is. He wanted to know, how prepared is the school system to overcome the environment that the child comes to the table with?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's sort of fascinating in the research. There was a great deal of research, and you probably are familiar with the Coleman report, came out in the 1960s, and the researchers were trying to figure out what were the school variables that could overcome neighborhood factors, and what they found out, to their surprise, actually, was that they can't.
They can't, because the neighborhood is, I mean, it's reflective.
Issues
the
of
school is reflective
issues
of
of poverty, issues of parent engagement are some of the key variables that influence student achievement. That said, they also found there were schools that were. And they were typically isolated, but there were schools that were doing this work. And today there's an organization called Ed.S. That's all they do. They look at schools that overcome neighborhood influences, overcome the barriers that everybody says that can't be overcome. And what you find in those schools is the acceptance that it's our responsibility to provide for students things that aren't being provided for at home. I'm going to give you a great example of the impact of poverty. It's called the 30 million word gap. And it was research that was done out at the University of Kansas, and it's about just the pure exposure to language that children receive. And what they found was that between the ages of 0 and 3 years, children in high-income families will hear 30 million more words than children from low-income families, which translates to a vocabulary gap by age 3 of about 600 words, which then by the time they get to kindergarten becomes about 2,000 words. And that is a significant fact, because achievement on standardized testing is directly linked to vocabulary.
Yes.
What's your vocabulary? And to what kind of vocabulary, because the test writers come from a certain background. And so that's very important for schools to understand. So an example of how do you overcome the influence of neighborhood and influence of lack of parent engagement or the challenges associated with poverty is, just as an example, teach more vocabulary. And teach it early and teach it fast, and provide reading interventions for students. We have in our classrooms, just to give you a perfect example of the equity dilemma, in a kindergarten classroom across 19 or 20 students, you will find students who know their math numbers, can recite the alphabet, can read. In that same classroom, at the opposite end of the spectrum, will be a student who, if the book does not have pictures in it, cannot orient the book because they've never been exposed to text.
Wow.
And so we can't teach them all one way and expect them all to be successful. And so there is a very real gap that exists when they walk in our doors. And if we don't intervene quickly and with intensity, that gap will only widen, and that's what has been proven out in the data over time nationally. And so that's where our work is intervene quickly and with intensity with students who struggle, and make sure they have what they need to become successful.
Rashard, what about the whole idea of teacher recruitment and finding teachers who are culturally aware, of various cultures, and that can deal with that in the classroom? Particularly, I'm thinking about African American males as an example, because I know that that's also a big issue from the discipline perspective, from a lot of different perspectives, because they don't see people who look like them. Is that important?
Well, it is important. You posed a question around teacher recruitment. Were you referring to recruiting more African-American males? Or?
Yeah, in other words, is it important to bring in more African-American male teachers? Is it more male teachers, period? I mean, I sit on the Norfolk Education Foundation. We did an award ceremony a little while ago, and it was overwhelmingly female.
So
in terms of the teachers,
right?
So it is yes and yes. So we've been having this conversation in Virginia Beach City Public Schools around, how important is it for us to have not just African American male teachers, but male teachers. Our males play a significant role in modeling for not just our young men that are in our schools, but also our young ladies. So we're having the conversations. How can we be intentional around recruiting teachers as they come out of college? We have a very active human resources department. They participate in college fairs. We go as far as taking both teachers and administrators, out of the building, and they participate during the college fair to recruit teachers. We're having conversations with our principals. As you look in the applicant tracking system, are we looking for a diverse population that's representative of our schools? It's extremely important to us. So I can tell you personally, as an African-American male teacher, when I started my career, I had great mentors and models, and
Well,
and that's really
part
important.
of that. Part of it is
It's personal, too.
talking to people about the whole idea of teachers being a noble profession. I mean,
It is a noble
lot of
profession.
people think, that may not be the profession, particularly men. Apparently, that it's not a great profession to go into. I got two men sitting here who are in the profession, so I assume you do a lot of talking to others about joining.
We do that, and in fairness, there is a national teacher shortage, and it is in key needs areas, mathematics and science, and some of that is about money, but a lot of it is about perception. And unfortunately, I would say over the last decade that somebody stumbled upon the brilliant idea of trying to say that all of the problems in our communities are about our teachers. And if you say that long enough and loud enough, people who are very bright and committed to things will not want to have that laid at their feet. Mm-hmm. And so they'll seek other opportunities. And I think what we need to do is reestablish the value and importance of teachers in our communities. They are the difference makers, and they're the reason that every one of us is where we are.
That's very true.
And we need to sing that loud and proud, and we do that in Virginia Beach, and I encourage every school division to do that, and I encourage our community to reach out and hug a teacher and thank them for making a difference, because I think until people esteem the profession again the way it used to be esteemed, we're going to continue to have difficulty finding people, black, white, female, male, or otherwise, to come into the profession.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Carl joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Carl. You're on the air.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for taking my call.
Uh-huh.
I've listened to this, and I'm going to dovetail on the gentleman who just finished. I'm an octogenarian. I have 2 PhDs. I went to Booker T, one of the primary schools in this area. What happened to the black motivation, number one? What happened to the churches that worked with them? What happened to the straddling of the teacher who can't take a child home when it's raining because they're afraid he or she is going to be molested? What happened to the drive for us as fraternities and sorority members? We are part of our own problem. How can we address that? And I'm going to take that one off the air.
Okay.
I have a group of erudite people, and your husband is part of that group that tries to make those changes. But where is the school failing us, and where are we, as the supposedly educated group, taking our youth?
Okay, Carl, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the call. I again, Carl's going back to the whole idea of community and how community can come together to help the schools, to help these students. So let's see. Lisa, which line are we going to next? Let's go to Emma in Virginia Beach. Hi, Emma, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you very much. I am concerned about the relationship between the diversity of the staff and the self-esteem of the students. I have talked to many people, and I am aware that there are many students in Virginia Beach, many students of color, who can go through the entire elementary school and even the high school, and they have very, very few, if any, teachers that reflect their race. And it's just a known fact that the self-image is very, very important and related to the ability to learn. I'm also aware that there are teachers who have tried to, there are African-American teachers who have tried to get jobs in Virginia Beach, but they are not hired, and they end up going to Norfolk, Portsmouth, driving the Newport News, wherever they have to go. So I think any serious discussion. One parent even told me that her child, and I know this is not, I don't believe it's uncommon, went through the entire Virginia Beach school system, and out of 12 years, she had one African-American teacher.
Okay, let's let Dr. Spence address that, and Emma, we appreciate your phone call. Thank you.
So really good points, and to be clear, I agree very much that we need to make sure that we have faculties that are representative of our student body. Mm-hmm. And I think that our faculties have not caught up with the shifting demographics in Virginia Beach. So I agree with the caller. We have made it a priority in our hiring processes. When we came in, I sat down with our chief of HR, and he's done a great job of challenging and tasking his team. And Mr. Wright, Rashard, has really done a great job of working with his principals, because at the end of the day, that's where the hiring happens, and making this a priority. And we are moving the needle on that. We are seeing small percentage increases in minority hiring in Virginia Beach, and we want to see larger percentage increases in minority hiring. That said, we will still have black children in white teachers' classrooms and vice versa. And I think one of the key things that you heard Rashard talking about, and that is a key piece of the work that we have going forward, it's come out of the recommendations of our discipline task force, and it's part of this work of excellence through equity, is this idea of awareness. And you asked about it earlier, about cultural awareness. And if I have a child in my classroom who does not look like me, what are my implicit biases, the things I may not be aware of but that do exist that may keep me from working with that child? And if we can raise that awareness and train and talk with our teachers about how to overcome that and build a strong relationship with every student as if they were their own child, I think we can make a real impact. And that's really our conversation. Treat children as if they were your own. How would you want that child treated in your classroom? And that's really, we've got training around that being developed right now for next year for all of our teachers. It came out of the work of our discipline task force. And I think we're going to begin to see a major shift in our thinking in this arena, because I don't think we'll ever get to the place where
I agree.
And you shouldn't, because really it's a diverse world. You're going to work with a lot of different people, and you need to know as a student, how do I get along with adults of all different colors, creeds, and sizes and shapes?
Because at some point you're going to have to deal with them. That's very true. There was another caller who wanted to know more about the discipline issue that you found, particularly of African-American males, but discipline problems, because he says taking them out of the classroom isn't working.
Well, that's exactly right. And I'll let Rashard talk about it, but I would say just quickly, again, I'm a big sort of what do the facts tell us? And the facts tell us that nationally, regionally, and in Virginia Beach, we suspend African-American male students in a disproportionate way. In other words, if African-American boys in Virginia Beach are 10% of our student population, they're 40% of our out-of-school suspensions, and that's not right. There's something off, and what we have to look at two things. We have to look at what is it we can do to better support the child, and then we have to look at it as what is it about our own behaviors that are creating the problems. And so it's not about finger pointing. It's not the kid's fault. It's not our fault. It's what structures do we have in place that will better support the child in the classroom, and then what are we doing in terms of our own implicit bias that may be further creating the problem. So you want to talk just for a second about the discipline task force work?
Sure. So I'll pinpoint one of the major recommendations. Well, all of them are major, but one of the recommendations from the discipline task force, Barbara, was to look at the discipline process and insert mediation as a first step before a disposition would be decided upon for a student around this situation, because it was a situation. And we also have to acknowledge that any discipline scenario is an example potentially for a child is trauma. And so is there a reason why this student is acting this way? So we've been analyzing the data. I'm looking at the referral rate, and also I'm looking at the referrals, and did that lead to a suspension? Was it an in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension? So from the discipline task force recommendations, we're looking at mediation. Oftentimes, an incident could occur where a young man or a young lady will be asked to leave the classroom, or an administrator will say, pick them up, remove them from the instructional environment because they're a distraction per se. Well, then the student returns at some point. Have we resolved the issue that took place? Have we created an environment where the student and the teacher can talk about it? Can we affirm our behaviors? Was it because of that middle school, incident? Someone talking about me, or am I upset about, did someone break up with me, or am I not prepared for a test or assessment? Did we move last night abruptly? Did I lose a grandparent I was very close with? But also for our teachers, they deserve to have the opportunity to remind our students of the goals and expectations that were set forth at the beginning of the year. But this recommendation, potentially can lead to those sustainable relationships that we were referring to around this equity framework. So that's an example of what we're looking to do with discipline.
So we've got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to give you, Dr. Spence, an opportunity to kind of buttonhole this for us in terms of the takeaways you want the audience to have for today.
Well, I think the key point is this. Education is the single most important thing that any child can get. And we as school divisions across this region understand and recognize that every child deserves our very best, and that the data tells us that's not always happening, and we cannot nor will we shy away from that conversation. And so we don't have all the answers. If we had all the answers, we'd already be getting this right, and I want to acknowledge that. It's complicated, it's messy. There are a lot of adults and children who have different ways of thinking about these issues. But we need to come together, and we need to have this conversation, and we need to make sure that at the end of the day we feel we've done our very best for every child in our care.
So will you come back, Rashard, and Dr. Spence, and let us know how things start to shape up and what changes you wind up making in the next school year, and how things start to progress from there? That would be awesome. We really appreciate it.
We would love to do that, and if you have time, we would love to extend the opportunity for you to come and join us at our conference.
Oh, great. I would love to do that, because I would love to learn more about the really nuts and bolts of what needs to happen within the classrooms and inside and out in terms of making sure that our students are successful. So thank you for that invitation. I appreciate that. That's Dr. Aaron Spence. He is Superintendent of Virginia Beach City Public Schools, and Mr. Rashard J. Wright, Virginia Beach City Public Schools Chief School Officer, and we will be right back.
I am Brother Cornell West, and when I'm in Hampton Roads, I make it a point to listen to Another View with my dear sister Barbara Ham Lee on WHRV-FM.
Oh, Dr. Cornell West, we just love hearing from him. Yes, we do. He's just 17 years old and is already ranked number 2 in the U.S. in his weight class. Keyshawn Davis is a boxer. In fact, he's the United States Junior Olympic boxing champion. But Keyshawn has no intentions of stopping there. As our Lisa Godley discovered, the Granby High School junior has his sights set on competing in the 2020 Summer Games.
I just like the competition.
U.S. Boxing ranks Keyshawn Davis the second best junior bantamweight in the country. Boxing has taken Keyshawn all over the United States, including the location of his last bout in Reno, where he won 4 of the 5 matches by unanimous decision. His final fight was against 2015 junior world champion Mark Castro.
What made it hard was, first of all, he was the crowd favorite, and a lot of officials, judges knew him. And also, he's a great fighter. Basically, I was fighting the judges, the crowd, and him. So that's what just made it hard, and I just had to tune everything out to do what I had to do.
It was the most highly anticipated bout of the day, and the 2 teenagers did not disappoint, battling it out for 3 intense rounds. But in the end, there could only be one winner, Castro winning the youth men's bantamweight title in a 2-1 split decision.
When they said the decision, everybody was booing and stuff. It was like, I should have won that fight. And I'm thinking I won too. It was a heartbreak because I just knew I won. That fight was a tournament fight. That was a championship bout. I fought 5 days. So those 4 days that I fought before I fought him, I won unanimously every fight. The hard ones and the easy ones.
The loss seems to have made Keyshawn even more hungry for Olympic gold. Right now, the Granby High School junior is taking advantage of a wonderful opportunity, working with Olympic athletes and coaches at training camp. He's sparring with America's best amateur boxers as they prepare for the summer 2016 games.
You're 17, and I know that's young, but do you ever think about the health risk tied to boxing?
Yes.
What are your biggest concerns?
Head injuries. And just how to invest my money so I won't go broke after the sport.
His love for the sport started at the age of 9, when Keyshawn's mother shared with her 3 sons that their father used to box. Keyshawn says when he and his brothers found that out, they all wanted to try it. And did they ever? His older brother Kelvin and his younger brother Keon are all boxing champions, each holding titles that did not come easy.
It's a lot of hard work, and you gotta really be serious about this kind of sport, because if you're not, you can really get hurt, or you can just really be wasting your time, because you're not gonna get far if you're not serious with this.
Keyshawn now holds 5 national titles and has his future all mapped out.
First of all, I'm going to go to the Olympics 2020. And after I win the Olympics in 2020, I'm going to go professional and just go far professional, see how far I can go. And then after I finish professional boxing, I want to open up my own gym and be a boxing coach.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Keyshawn, go Keyshawn. He said he wants to make sure he manages his money. I love that. Keyshawn is the younger brother of one of our wonderful former Another View interns, Ms. Chantel Davis. So they're a very accomplished family. We appreciate them. Thanks for joining us today. There's a cool new way to take Another View with you on your smartphone. Go to your app store and download the new WHRO Media app. You can find Another View and all of the great programming you hear or see on WHRO Public Media. Next week, up close and personal with Congressman Scott Ridgell and his wife Terry as the congressman prepares to step away from politics. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen took some time off today because today's his birthday. Happy birthday, Victor. So thanks to Todd Washburn for filling in. And I'm not sure who answered our phones, but thank you, interns there. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a wonderful Memorial Day holiday weekend, everyone. And remember to say a prayer for those families of the servicemen and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. We'll get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.